All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Howard Winchester. I am the communications manager here at Learning Heroes, and thank you so much for attending our webinar today for our newly released report, Parents 2020 COVID-19 Closures, a redefining moment for students, parents, and schools. We have an amazing presentation for you guys today, featuring our founder and president, Dib Hubbard, Adam Burns of Edge Research, Cornelia Caliste, our Director of Partnerships, David Park, our Senior Vice President of Strategy and Communications, as well as two of our partners, Gloria Corral from PK and Sarah Martinez from West Ed. Like I said, we have an amazing presentation scheduled for you guys today. And just some housekeeping before we begin. Everyone's mic will be muted throughout the duration of the webinar. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of the webinar, so please, during the presentation and at the end, you can put your questions in the question box or the chat, and we'll be sure to read those off at the end. And if you are having trouble seeing the presentation, there are 3 bars at the top of the presentation. You can just kind of scroll those up so that the presentation will be full screen for you if you're having trouble seeing it. Without further ado, I'll pass it along to David.
Great, thanks Howard, and thank you everybody for being part of our webinar today. So depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon. We're so happy to be presenting this research today to you and with you. We really do want this to be a dialogue, a conversation, so we look forward to your questions and your thoughts and your pushes. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Learning Heroes, we're a nonprofit organization. We're focused on supporting parents and guardians as their child's most effective education advocate. And we do that work by working really with a host of partner organizations, many of whom are on the webinar with us today. And we help parents develop a complete and accurate picture of their child's development and achievement. We believe this will enable parents to better advocate for their child, and also in turn improve schools and create more equitable systems throughout the country. So that's our theory of action. And we also help parents know what's expected of their children in the current grade, the next grade, as well as in high school and beyond. The critically important knowledge of understanding where your child stands, whether it's academically or developmentally. And also we help parents, importantly, understand what actions that they can take so that they can advocate on behalf of their child's educational success. And what is exciting is this research shows that there's a true appetite for deeper engagements. And parents are really leaning in at this moment in time. And so we're super excited about that. And we'll find out a little bit more about that when Bib presents the data. So we, early on, when we first launched Learning Heroes 5 years ago, we decided that we would be a lot smarter if we listened to parents. And so we've, throughout the years, we've done 13 national surveys, over 200 qualitative sessions. We have a focus in low-income parents and parents of color in all of our research, which is all done in English and Spanish. So we've really done a ton of qualitative and quantitative research. And this is really helpful because when we did the research at this moment in time during COVID-19, we're able to kind of look back and contextualize it based on the 4 or 5 years prior to this and make some assumptions and dig deeper because of that knowledge. Another thing, going to the next slide, is that we work, and I mentioned this before, we work with a lot of partners. So you see some of them on here, we work with a lot of others, and that's made us smarter as well. So whether it's working with state education agencies or LEAs or our terrific nonprofit partners like the National PTA, Unidos US, National Urban League. We also work with Univision, WNET, so media organizations and so forth. We really have enjoyed kind of working and learning from a lot of the partners that are part of this webinar as well. And about 15 of our partners actually contributed to the research today that we're going to talk about. And so we're very grateful for that. And with the help of our partners last year, we were able to reach 23 million parents and guardians. And so we're hoping to do that again this year. Super exciting at this moment in time when all of us are collectively supporting parents. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the founder and president of Learning Heroes, Bib Hubbard.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. The research is fascinating, and we hope it will be helpful to you and your work, as we know it informs and drives our work. So with that, just want to kick it off. Parents 2020, as David said, this is our 5th annual survey among many other national surveys, but we wanted a couple things we wanted to learn, specifically focusing on the parents who have historically been underserved. So how has this remote schooling impacted parents' perceptions of their children's achievement? What keeps them up at night? What are they worried about? How are schools and teachers interacting with parents and their children right now? And importantly, what are the actions that parents are going to take moving forward? What behaviors are they willing to sort of lean into as a result of this moment in time? So we have some initial insights, and again, really interested to hear from you about how you perceive all of this and your takeaway, because we know there are lots of different perspectives. But for us, what surfaced was parents are activated despite the just incredible demands on them. They're engaged with their children's learning right now, and they will show up differently next year, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And parents, well, they continue to deserve an accurate picture. Many of you know that in 2016, we surfaced that 9 out of 10 parents believe their children are at or above grade level in both reading and math, and that's regardless of race, income, education levels. Well, that 90% has just increased, and yet again, we find this year it's 92%, and many of you know, we use NAEP as a benchmark. NAEP puts American students at about 37% who are proficient or above, so just this massive perception gap that we're working really hard to address with parents. And then, this is an opportunity as we look forward to redefine relationships between schools and homes, parents and teachers and students. We think this is a really a defining moment, as the report says, to take advantage of, to redesign how parents and teachers interact with each other in support of children and student learning. So with that, what's our methodology? This is a large sample, probably one of the largest samples you'll see out there. We polled more than 3,600 parents and guardians, again, nationally representative survey, and we wanted to learn about some of the nuances. We know that parents are not experiencing this moment all in the same way, so we wanted to deeply understand that parent experience. So we oversampled with African American parents, Latino parents, which is what we consistently do, but this year we also did parents who have children in transition grades, so 5th to 6th, 7th to 8th, 8th to 9th, and 11th to 12th. And then we also wanted to see how parents who are in hotspots, COVID hotspots, are experiencing their children's remote learning differently. So we oversampled parents in California, New York, and Washington State. We conducted the survey between April 14th and May 6th, and it was offered in both English and in Spanish, as we typically do for all of our research. And throughout this research, you'll see if there's a blue box or blue, if it's shaded blue, it's statistically significantly higher. If it's shaded red, it's statistically significantly lower. And then we also have some additional benchmarking data. So some of our 2019 data, and if you see that and you see a green arrow up, it means it's statistically significantly higher from 2019, or down, that red arrow, it means it's statistically significantly lower than 2019. So let's dive in. As we think about the context for parents, right now, parents are rising to the challenge. But mostly when we asked, we said, what's the dominant feeling that you're feeling as a parent today? We kept it really open-ended. They're mostly anxious and worried, but also, and I found this really kind of inspiring, they're hopeful, they're grateful, they're optimistic. And as a parent myself, I sort of get it when I think about it. I'm just grateful for my family and hopeful for the future and all that's to come. But, given, just the narrative that's out there about how parents are feeling, I was really inspired to see this. And we also asked parents, what's keeping you up at night? And not too surprisingly, missing those social interactions definitely rises to the top. Someone in your family getting COVID, getting sick, again, not super surprising, but also for us encouraging that education is right there up in the top tier, making sure your child stays on track so he or she is ready for the next grade. School closures, changes might negatively impact my child's education, number 3 and 4, and too much screen time, rounds out the top 5 and much higher than food or financial security. So that was a surprise and an interest to us that education really for parents is that top priority. And even in these really uncertain times, you can see parents' aspirations are, continue to grow. Again, super exciting to see how important is it for you to have your child go to college, up to 76% now, higher for African American and Hispanics. How confident are you that your child will be prepared for success into and through college? 73%, significantly higher now, especially among African Americans and white families, much higher this year from last year. And all of this, and this has been kind of reported widely, and we also found it in our data, deeper appreciation for teachers, 71% agree, like, oh my gosh, this is a tough job, but I really appreciate it. Higher for African American Hispanic families. 95% have said that they've heard from their teacher in some way, shape, or form, yet only 33% say they have regular access to their teachers, and less for African American and Hispanic families. And this is important because for some of our previous research, we heard from teachers that the number one way for parents to know how their child is achieving from a teacher's point of view is ongoing communications with the teacher. Yet we can see only 33% of parents have access right now to that ongoing communication. So really important to think about as we go through the rest of this data. Similarly, parents feel more connected to their child's day-to-day education. Again, that makes sense, and we know that's been reported. But importantly, 70% want to know, what materials their child is, the material their child is missing at the end of this year, and what's the plan to make that up? Really important for parents, 70% agree, higher for African American Hispanic, 75%, as you can see. This is really important for parents. Let's see. My little clicker, stop clicking, there we go. And all of this, despite all of this deeper engagement and appreciation and connection, we thought that this at or above grade level perception would have declined. So we were initially surprised to see these numbers increase. The more that we sort of scratch the surface and we dig into the data, you'll see a picture emerges, which has it make a little bit more sense. So 83%, for example, of parents say that their children are getting all A's or B's. And with that, only 36% agree that their children will need academic catch-up next year because of the situation, which all kind of paints this very confident picture. But as we dig into the 36% and that sort of catch-up phrase, the more we thought about it, I think parents are assuming that we're all in this together. All children are sort of going to be similarly disadvantaged because we're all sort of in this remote learning place. So next year, my child won't need any more catch-up than anybody else because we're sort of all, again, sort of all in this together. So that's just sort of one hypothesis we have about why that 36% was so low in terms of the parents who think that their children will need catch-up for next year. So with that, I'm really excited to sort of hit pause and give two folks an opportunity to give us their reflections, their experience on the ground. So Cornelia Caliste, Director of Partnerships for Learning Heroes, is going to have a quick conversation with Gloria Corral, President and CEO of PK. Thank you so much for being here with us, Gloria. We're eager to hear your thoughts. So Cornelia.
Thanks for the introduction, Viv, and thanks again, Gloria, for joining us today. You recently released a set of data from California capturing the new realities for families that are facing the COVID-19 related school closures. Reflecting on Parents 2020 data that we just shared and your research, how does your survey complement Parent 2020, and how does it differ based on the nature of the communities you serve in California?
Thank you, Cornelia. Thank you, Bib, and thank you for inviting me. I think this is an incredibly important conversation, and the more information and data that we have about the realities or the different sets of realities that families are experiencing, the better off we are, I think, to respond appropriately. And as you said, PICA is a national organization, and we just released our own data of parent survey, about 1,400 parents that are Spanish speaking from across the state of California. And there are three really important ways that your data really complements in some ways and differs importantly. I'll start where they're very complementary. And also different. So what we found with the families that we interviewed was that their biggest concern was health. So they were very concerned, which is similar to your findings. But interestingly, it's because over a third of the families that we surveyed were uninsured. And so you can imagine that if in the middle of a medical crisis, in the middle of a medical pandemic, getting sick or getting your family sick would clearly, without health insurance, would clearly rise to a level of concern that would really raise a negative prospect for your family and for your children. The other really interesting point that I think are very similar is that what we found was there's a huge digital divide, which we knew existed, that is now a chasm. And so with the information of the families that we served, especially in Central Valley in California, that's a very rural part, agricultural part of the state, there was really substantial differences in the ability of families to access distance learning in any modality. And so the difference, I think, that are very apparent to Bib's point, that everybody thinks that everybody's experiencing this pandemic in a similar way, we found that connectivity and broadband are huge differences across California, and that really would determine whether or not you're able to access your teacher. As an example, we had very similar responses that while 95% of parents had some level of connection with their school or their teacher, about a third of them, only a third of them actually were able to connect. And so that, I think, is really an issue for us to consider moving forward. The other piece to the digital divide and the chasm that exists is that, as we all know, having an email address in an online world is really your identity. So if you don't have an email address, you really don't exist in a lot of ways online. And what our research found was that in parts of the state in California, over 54% of parents did not have an email address. And so that really limits your ability not just to engage with teachers in the school system, but also importantly in this broader context around accessing online resources more broadly. Finally, I think one of the things that our data really suggests and is important from the work that we've been doing, this, we've done over 10,000 phone calls to parents. And so really understanding that the challenge before us is really to have a holistic approach to how we engage with families. And I think that is critically important as we think about educational equity and how families are able to or not able to access what we want for all children. And that is, we have to think about not just accessibility with respect to broadband equipment, kind of the nuts and bolts, if you will, but also around these additional barriers that some of the families are encountering, like health concerns, their ability to, in our case, their ability to pay for food, for shelter. And until we're able to have families stable in those basic necessities, until then, we won't be able to really engage. And I think that the final point that I'll leave you with is that as we think about the holistic approach, really to address these issues around social justice and educational equity, which I know we share those values with you, is really understanding that digital literacy and technology skills is really another domain that we need to really think about with respect to families, because especially those that are low income and that are challenged by limited skills in this category, they really, until we are able to address those issues, they will not be empowered to be their child's first and most ardent advocate, which is what we know we want every parent to be. So I will leave you with this picture that I think really epitomizes where we are. We have a mom, 3 children, and she puts all 3 kids in her car, parks in the parking lot of a mall where there's free Wi-Fi, and her high school daughter is the only one that has a tablet. And so for an hour and a half or 2 hours where the free Wi-Fi is available, that's when that family is actually able to be connected. And so the high schooler does her homework. The other 2 children are in the car while the mom sits there waiting for her daughter to be done with whatever she can get done with during that free Wi-Fi session. And so when we think about what this means in terms of educational opportunities and distance learning, we really do need to think holistically to really address the imperative of ensuring that educational equity is reached for all families.
Thanks for sharing, Gloria. Viv?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gloria. Thank you for painting that picture and bringing to life the data in such a meaningful way. So thank you for your comments, and they totally resonate. And actually, you've teed it up in a great way for what's to come. So let's dig in a little bit with Gloria's image in her that she just gave us, which has been sort of haunting me as I've been reading about those, we're putting those families at risk by asking them to leave their homes to get access to the internet, which is just, like morally horrible. So thank you and what they're willing to do, of course. But as we dig in, what does it look like for parents? And interestingly, a majority of parents do feel prepared to support remote learning. And again, this is sort of a national sample. 54% say feel completely or very prepared to support their child while they're doing their schoolwork at home. 34% are sort of in that like mushy middle, and 13% are just admit that they're not prepared at all. And you can see African American 68%, much higher, feel completely very prepared. And similarly, we asked, how, to sort of dig in a little bit more deeply, is this better or worse, like easier or harder? And, kind of parents sort of feel both, right? So 57% of parents say that their child's remote schooling is working better than they expected. Yet we still have 52% who say that it's hard. It's harder than they expected. So there's sort of this nuanced experience that's happening for parents, and they're sort of split on it. So that's sort of an important context too as we dig in. And here we see 90% of parents say that they're using a school-provided set of resources and materials. So by and large, most parents, that's what they're relying on, understandably. Yet we were surprised that only 23%, barely a quarter, are using external resources. You can see it's a little bit higher for African Americans, especially those without a reliable internet access, elementary school parents, parents working from home, but still kind of a surprisingly small number, I thought, of parents who are looking outside their school. So they're really relying on their school's materials. And then we asked, we gave parents 13 different kinds of resources that we thought were pretty basic, and and which of these are you receiving? And I was, I shouldn't have been so shocked, but I was shocked at how low these numbers are. So the highest number, the highest percentage of what parents are receiving are clear expectations for daily, weekly schoolwork. A full 61% don't have clear expectations. That should be at the very basic. That should be the basement. Online resources that you can use for guidance, 35%, regular access to your child's teacher, again, that 33%, personal technology, only 30% of parents report their children have a district or school issued piece of technology. And even fewer have personalized resources. And this is important because you'll start to see a theme emerge for parents around the sort of the need for the personalized attention, as I mentioned earlier. So you can see personal guidance for how best to support your child, 15%, a hotline to help, answer questions, 12%, access to mental health services and support, only 11% are receiving these resources. And we asked open-ended, of that 23%, where are you going? What are the resources you're using? So this is like, it's, as for those of you who are familiar with research, open ends are sort of all over the place. And parents similarly there isn't huge density. You can see Khan Academy, Scholastic, ABC Mouse sort of rise to the top. But mostly it's YouTube, Google, these general websites in general. So there isn't like a clear, winner for where parents are going to get access to resources. So as we in the field think about how to best support families, really thinking about, is there a way to understand how to get these resources, helpful resources to parents to support what they're not getting from schools. And then when we asked parents, what is most helpful in terms of the resources you've received, you can see these yellow boxes start to tell a story. And again, it's about this sort of personalized, kind of theme, if you will. So of the 30% who received personal technology, 53% say that it was, extremely helpful. So this is top box. So this is not top 2 box. This is top box. These are really big numbers. Option for remote one-to-one time tutoring with a teacher, 44% said it was extremely helpful. A hotline, 39% said it was extremely helpful. And these are the biggest gaps, access to mental health. So of the parents who receive these resources, these are where the biggest gaps remain in terms of the percentage of parents who are getting them. And then in terms of how parents are communicating with teachers, we find, and this goes to Gloria's good point, most parents are getting an email. So for those families who don't have an email address, they're not getting anything, probably. And of the parents who are getting text messages and phone calls, you can see that 80%, that's a top 2 box number, find them extremely helpful. So again, hearing from your teacher directly about your child as opposed to sort of a robo email is really constructive, really important for parents when you look at those 80% numbers. And we also wanted to know how children are spending their time. So again, parents report that 56% of their child's awake time involves a screen. And again, I think that back maps to that worry, the top 5 worry about screen time. And a full 46% of the child's awake time is dedicated to learning. So again, I was sort of surprised by that number, given sort of the narrative out there that most kids aren't spending time engaged in schoolwork. So, and then we wanted to know what does that break down in terms of hours? So parents report about on average, 4.2 hours a day of schoolwork. It's a little bit lower among those who are missing technology. And then not similarly, but interestingly, almost a quarter of parents, however, said that their children are only spending 1 hour per day on schoolwork. And not too surprisingly, it's higher among those who don't have reliable internet access or missing a device or internet, or that parent is working outside of the home. So that's just a huge number of parents whose children are only spending 1 hour of it per day on schoolwork. So just something to consider as well. And then we were interested in, how much time are parents spending? And again, I was surprised, 2.5 hours per day is a lot of time when we're juggling so many different things and lots of demands being put on parents right now. Elementary school, it's even higher. For those who feel very or completely prepared, it's even higher. So I was interested to learn that parents are deeply engaged. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Cornelia, who's going to talk with Sarah Martinez, a senior research associate at WestEd. So Cornelia?
Yeah. Hi, we have Sarah who's on the call. Sarah, we talked a little bit about reflecting on your work with the academic parent-teacher teams and this data. What else can teachers and educators do, even during school closures, to provide parents with a better understanding of what will be expected of their child in the upcoming school year?
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. And I apologize for the technology glitch and not being able for you not to be able to see me live. When I think about the work we're doing with academic parent-teacher teams, we've seen teachers and schools are really doing the best that they can during school closures. And we've seen evidence of that in the schools we work with, in our neighborhoods, and even, on the news. And with that, the data tells us that families want and need more support in understanding what is expected of their child. But in order to be able to have those conversations, educators need to begin by building trusting relationships, partnerships with families. We know that teachers are the lifeline between home and school, and most families receive information about what's going on at their school from their teacher. However, what we've seen is that building relationships and partnerships with families is easier said than done. What we've seen is that most districts and even credentialing certificate programs don't provide that professional development or coursework around how to build trusting relationships and partnerships with families. Research tells our schools and our teachers go out and build these relationships with families, but how? We don't show teachers and schools what best practices in doing that. And what we've seen is that for some teachers, when we ask them to go out and build relationships and partnerships with families, it's easy. They're able to do it. They're excited to get to know their students' families. While for others, it just isn't that easy. And every year I hear teachers tell me, they're saying, put me in front of 30 10-year-olds and I know what to do. Yeah, I don't even need a lesson plan, but put me in a room with 10 parents and I forget everything I wanted to say. And so that's that what we need for our teachers in our schools is the how to. And the thing is that we can't build relationships with families if we're not contacting them. And if that contact isn't ongoing and consistent, if we aren't hearing and seeing one another, building relationships is different. And we've seen that need for interaction and connection more than ever in our own households, with our friends, with our families, with our colleagues. And what we just saw from the research is that families want access to their teachers, and that 76% of families reported wanting regular access. So once we begin to build that trusting relationship partnership, we're able to have those honest, transparent, and collaborative conversations. We know that teachers want and families want their child to make academic progress, but we need to be able to be honest and we need to be able to work together. And what we have found is that teachers and schools don't always explain and provide clear grade level expectations in a way that is easy for families to understand. Specifically, what skill level is expected to be mastered by the end of the school year, and providing families with examples of what that looks like when a student has reached that level. And so teachers and schools need to be honest of where students are at academically, and let families know what that means for their child and what they can do as parents to support their child. Families want to know how best to support their child, and they deserve that accurate picture from what we've heard. But in order to be able to do all that, we need schools and we need district leadership to support and embed family engagement in the school culture and structure. We've found that many times family engagement can be an afterthought or something schools do in order to check a box. We need leadership to provide guidance, support, professional development at all levels, not just at the educator level, but at leadership level as well. We also provide rewards, incentives to our educators who have made an impact in partnering with our parents. So I want to just leave it at, we have good people out there doing great things in our schools. It's the process and how we're engaging our families that needs some work in order for us to begin building relationships with families and having honest conversations so families can have a better understanding on what is expected and how they can support their child. So thank you so much.
No, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Bev?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. That was really so insightful. And, I think there's a lot of, as you said, impressive, important work happening, but how do we, take that to a broader scale and engage many more families? And I think we have an opportunity. So again, what a wonderful segue as we think about what's coming next. So we asked parents, what would they favor or oppose in terms of some scenarios as we move forward in looking to the summer and next fall. And so one of the options we put forward was making academic summer school courses available so students could catch up before next year. And you can see there's a great amount of favorability here. Starting the school year early, still somewhat favorable at 46%, but getting a little bit more a little bit more opposition, sort of sticking with this like neutral 23% neutral zone. And then when we asked extending the school year next year into summer, you can see there's much more opposition that sort of starts to grow and the favorability starts to shrink a bit. But interestingly, when we talked about the academic summer school courses for catch-up, we assumed it was safe. I mean, we definitely said it was just only if it's safe to send your children. So we saw 55% of African Americans who were very or extremely likely to send their children to the academic catch-up option. 58% of Latino families said, yep, I would be extremely or very likely to send my child. And for the parents who are working outside of the home currently, 53% of those families said that they would be very or extremely likely to send their children to sort of this academic catch-up option. And it was 45% overall, so almost half of all families thought that they would be very or extremely likely to do that, again, assuming it's safe. And then we asked about next year, and this is, for me, such an inspiring slide. Families will show up differently next year. Their expectations are increasing. They have been activated. And again, this is sort of a defining moment for our country, really, to build parents into their child's education in really explicit ways. And would love to hear from you about some of the work that you're seeing along these lines. But, we see 73%, I'm going to get a better understanding of what my child is expected to learn. I'm going to find more time to talk to my children about their everyday assignments. That's amazing. Seeking a better understanding of where my child is academically, hopefully getting at that, accurate picture. Talk to the teacher about what I noticed regarding my child's learning and schoolwork during the school closure, 64%. And that's important because, again, as we've talked to parents over the years, many parents are a bit gun shy to be truthfully honest with their new teachers headed into the fall because they don't want to bias a teacher's thinking about any potential shortcomings that their child might have. So the fact that 64% say that they're willing to talk to their teachers about what happened in this closure time is a big deal. Develop a stronger relationship with my child's teacher than I've had in the past. Also, 60%. And when you look at African American and Latino families, these numbers are even stronger. So we were really inspired by the response we heard from parents along these lines, and think it's a huge opportunity for us in the field to find ways to make sure that parents get access to more information about their children's learning, about what those expectations are, find ways to enable teachers to engage with families in an ongoing way. We know that teachers are really struggling with just figuring out this remote schooling. They have a huge learning curve. They're trying really hard. So we need to give them the capacity to be able to do this. So there's a lot of work ahead, but we feel like we've really heard from parents about what the potential and the possibility is. And I think I'm pretty optimistic and excited by it. So with that, I'm going to turn us over to some questions and answers. So Howard, I think you're going to help us with the chat box.
Yep. So we have a couple of questions for you guys to answer. The first one, and this can either be Bib, yourself, Gloria, or Adam. It's from Cynthia Rodriguez, and she asks, has language been an issue among Hispanic families while remote schooling?
Yeah, I think, I can sort of just give a quick, because I've literally got this page turned in front of me, so I can sort of speak to the data. But then Gloria, I think you really should take this one. But in terms of, we asked if families were getting resources from schools in Spanish, so a little bit of a different question, but the numbers, not surprisingly, are really, really low. So for example, we saw, 39% of parents said that they were getting clear expectations of their children's learning. Only 11% say they're getting those in Spanish, and that's on the higher end. So it's clear that Spanish-speaking families are not getting these materials in Spanish, or getting less materials in Spanish than the few parents who were getting the materials at all. But Gloria, would love to hear you speak to that question.
Wonderful, thanks, Bib. Yes, so our survey was Spanish-speaking families, and so two really important things, very similar to what you just mentioned with respect to this survey. One is that while there may be materials in Spanish, especially instructions are not accessible, and so families might be getting 10 pages on how to do things. However, they are not able to access that information because of literacy issues. Some families are not even, the level of literacy is a particular concern. And so it is a huge concern. And then also, I think some of the translations make a set of assumptions about the family's ability to engage with the vocabulary. And I'll give you one very quick example. One of our parents said, they told me, this is in Spanish, they told us to find a hotspot. I don't know what a hotspot is. And so that word hotspot in Spanish, if you don't have it doesn't really exist. It's a technology word, but if you don't know that because you don't have technology literacy or digital literacy, there is no lugar caliente. That's a literal translation. And so it really is not in a way to make it accessible. So language is a huge issue, not just whether or not they're getting materials in their language, but even if they are they able to access those materials and with enough fluency to make it a successful experience to support their children's learning.
Thank you. Howard, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you guys so much for that question and those answers. The next question we have is from Paul Robach. He asked, did you interview any teachers or district admins to get their thoughts on those same survey questions you asked parents?
We didn't, but I was literally just on a webinar with Ed Week, and they've been surveying teachers and district officials since March on a weekly basis. So I highly encourage you to check out the Ed Week results. They're fascinating. So yeah, but we did not. We just focused on parents, but they've got really interesting data on teachers and district leaders.
Awesome. Next question comes from Patrick Corvington. He asks, any information on how families are accessing mental health services, if at all, in the distance environment?
So we did not ask the details underneath the mental health services. We just asked if you were getting access to mental health services. And I think it's 11%, if I'm not mistaken, Adam, who are getting access to mental health services from their district, from their schools. So it's a pretty low number, but we didn't ask the specifics. And Gloria, I'm not sure if you, in your survey, got any more information about the kinds of mental health services your families are receiving.
We didn't. We asked specifically about English language supports and IEP, so the individualized education plans. So those were the questions that we asked.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. This question comes from Eulalia Valdez, and I'm so sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. This question is for Sarah. I completely agree with you that we need to provide staff how-to strategies for connecting with families and building trusting relationships. Do you have resources that you can share?
Awesome. great question.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And, one of the things that we do with our team, with academic parent teacher teams, is really support teachers around how best practices on connecting with families. And so some examples that we do is creating a plan for outreach, family outreach, not just saying I'm going to reach out to families, but really coming up with a plan of what that would look like. When am I going to reach out to families? If we leave it up to, oh yeah, I'm going to reach out to families, we tend to not. We see that teachers, get busy. Educators get busy. So one of the biggest recommendations that we have is coming up as a grade level with a plan for how are we going to reach our families and what are we going to do. And so that's probably my biggest advice, is really planning out how you're going to start building relationships with families, because building relationships, it's with anything, with anyone, even our own personal relationships, it's that constant contact. But we have to be mindful of it. We have to make sure that we're doing it and we don't forget. And so we always recommend to our schools and our teachers to really come up with a plan and get creative around how are we going to do it, and making sure that it's a personal connection, not just like we heard from the research emails. Parents are, if they have an email, they are receiving those emails, but they really want that phone call, that personal connection with their teacher. And so that's my recommendation, just in a short little bit, my recommendation around how to begin building those relationships with our families. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. The next question for Bib is from Karen Liskozek. She asks, can you give suggestions on how to talk with families, parent virtual nights, letters, etc.?
Actually, I'm going to ask Cornelia, who is, I think, a family engagement expert, to tackle that one. She's got a lot of deep experience in those school-based experiences. So Cornelia, I would love for you to address that one.
Yeah, I was checking that out. Different ways to connect and communicate with parents, and just given where we are, like a virtual parent power hour, an opportunity to kind of connect and have all parents being able to join in. What parents really love to know is that, like, you're reaching out, but be able to provide some contact or content about their child, but more on the level that they can be able to understand. So creating that level and understanding of something on a mutual platform like the parent power hour, or being able to give them like the phone calls, to be able to tell them, give a progress update of their child has been really helpful. Starting in the beginning of the year, of course, is great, but where we are right now and given the times, it would be great to maybe do a year-end closeout and provide some different levels of outreach and let them know how you plan to support their child during the summer moving on into the new school year.
Cornelia, I just want to add to that. I think that's exactly it. That power hour, getting parents together on Zoom to feel connected to one another, to know that they're not alone in this. A lot of times we think, is this just me? Is it just me and my child? Are we the only ones struggling with this? When you have that, that power hour, that togetherness, you get to share and really learn from one another. Families have a lot of great ideas on how I can, work with my child at home. And I think that was, an excellent way to get families connected with each other, so you don't feel so alone in a time where right now families are feeling like they're alone. And so that's a really great suggestion. Thank you for that.
Yeah, can I just chime in? I would just say that is true for those that are connected. I think we need to really be thoughtful about those that can't join for a whole host of reasons, whether they're working remotely, not at home, they're away from their office. I think language really matters. And so I think that is a great strategy, but I think we have to be mindful that language and accessibility and connectivity really are part of the construct around which we need to think about the community and the families, and provide multiple strategies based on those families that have different abilities at their disposal. And so I would say come up with 2 or 3 strategies, try them, learn from them. That's what we've been doing. Maybe call in the morning, they didn't pick up, you call in the evening, you might call in the midday, you send a text. So there are a lot of different ways. And then connecting, I think, importantly, the first thing that we do is we ask them, how are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? And from there, just making, I think, exactly what Sarah was saying in terms of that personal connection, moving forward from there. And so I would, sorry to jump in, but I just feel like it's so important to remind ourselves that connectivity is really an issue. It has nothing to do with whether parents are willing to engage. It's giving them the multiple opportunities to do so in a way that's successful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you for that, Gloria. And Gloria, another way that we thought that being able to integrate community partners as a way to support when you're reaching out to parents and families, different formats, whether it's through mail, whether it's through phone call, being able to ask them, how do they like to be communicated with? What is their preferred method? Thinking about, is it in the morning, is it in the afternoon, to make that genuine connection. So I appreciate you bringing up that point, Gloria. Thank you again. And Sarah.
I think thanks all of you guys. So we have a comment from Paul Robach. He says, I hope you have considered conducting follow-up surveys going into the summer and again in the autumn. We really need to know how the data is trending.
Yes, you're reading our minds. We would love to do that. So hopefully we can get the funding to support it. But yes, we stay tuned.
From Charles Goodmaker in New Mexico, he says, hi, the telecom industry and local business groups in underserved areas are natural partners to collaborate with in terms of advocacy for more support from our state and other levels of government to expand broadband to currently underserved areas. Any examples of successful collaborative efforts? And Gloria, this is directed to you.
I think that's a huge issue, and I think there is a lot of goodwill and a lot of really important work and conversations that need to happen. So in California, we have been in conversations at the state level with multiple providers about connectivity. And so I think there's a desire and recognition that this is a multi-pronged, multi-year effort, right? So there are some short-term ways of addressing the connectivity issue. However, and so we should deploy those, especially in some of the rural and communities, and even in some urban communities where the broadband is not, and the speed doesn't match with the really fancy, and interactive functions that children can access. So I do think that there is a very well-intentioned effort on the part of industry to respond to this moment. And I think it's a short-term response and a longer-term response. So making things accessible in the short term, for instance, with free internet for those that can actually can connect, provide hotspots where their connectivity is a huge challenge, and then really thinking about the longer term infrastructure questions that this raises, because it does raise infrastructure questions. And I think that those are the conversations that are happening both at the state level, certainly in California, and then more broadly, I think at the federal level, as we know that we are transitioning back to some hybrid version of distance learning, not having a large portion of children actually have the means by which they can engage educationally is not an option. So we need to both be creative and have a short and a long-term strategy for it.
Awesome, thank you so much. From Lori Wathan of Student Success in the Oklahoma PTA, she asks, is any of this data broken down to students receiving special education services?
Yes, and Adam, do you want to speak to this?
Sure, absolutely. And there's a lot that we can do a much deeper dive into all of this data, as I know that Bib has mentioned before. But just to give you some highlights as we look at parents who indicate that their children have IEPs or 504s, what we notice, and just again, a couple of highlights here, that parents report that these kids are more likely to be in that less than an hour per day group when it comes to the amount of time that they're spending, yet the amount of time the parents are spending is still about the same. So the hours are more similar with the amount of time that the kids are spending with the time that the parents are spending on the daily schoolwork. Also, these parents are more likely to have seen their children struggle, but they're not necessarily getting the support and the resources that they need. When we think, and let's speak very quickly to some of that leaning in that Bib talked about for this upcoming school year, these parents are more likely to indicate that they want to talk to their teachers about what they noticed during their child's learning during the school closure. They're also more likely to say that they absolutely want to get a better understanding where their child is academically, as well as to make sure that they have a stronger relationship with their teacher than they've had in the past. Again, a couple of nuggets there, but there's much more that we can share.
Yeah, you can please do follow up with us if you've got specific requests with for some of this data that's cut in a specific way. We're eager to share it. We just have to sort of package it as best we can, but just shoot us a note.
Next question for Bib or Adam from Susan Shador. Could you kindly share the source of the data shared today? Who conducted the primary research, when, sample size, and where? Thank you so much.
Take it away, Adam.
Sure. So in research, we've had the privilege of being able to partner with Learning Heroes on their quantitative and qualitative efforts over the past few years. We conducted the survey together in developing the survey, and I believe Bib talked about how 15 partners helped with survey content, which was extremely invaluable and gave you the questions as they needed to be asked. But we had over 3,600 parents respond to the survey. It was conducted in both English and Spanish and weighted, so it's representative of the US parent population. But we also included oversamples or additional surveys conducted among key audiences of exploration, among African American parents, among Latino parents, as well as key hotspots, specific states, New York, California, and Washington State, as well as focusing on parents of children in those transition grades, 5th, 8th, and then 11th and 12th grade. Again, all those oversamples were, as we say, weighted down, so the survey is representative, but a lot of power with that sample size for sure.
Awesome. So I know we have a couple of more questions, and unfortunately we only have 2 minutes left. So for anyone whose questions or comments did not get answered, we will send you a follow-up right after this webinar. Before we let you guys go, I do want to let you guys know that this webinar recording will be sent to everyone following the end of this presentation, as well as the slides from today, and also a link to our report. If you have not read the report, please do so, and also a link to a video that we created, which we're really proud of, that highlights certain insights from the report that you can, share in your networks. So with that, I will turn it over to David to close us out.
Yeah, so just wanted to kind of repeat what Howard said, that we will be following up with you. You can, you'll have the slides, you'll have a social media toolkit, and we'll also try to answer all of the questions that didn't get answered. Thank you so much for participating today. We learned a lot from you.